I don't know when I started disappearing, but I remember the first time I felt it. It was a quiet Sunday evening, the kind we used to treasure when the kids were little. Chicken roasting soft music from the radio, the clatter of cutlery and chairs pulled back from the table. I had made a full meal just like I used to. My hands still remembered how to fold dumplings, how long to steam the vegetables, so they stayed bright but soft, how to season the broth, the way they liked it, not too salty, a little bit sweet. I set the table just so napkins folded bowls placed where they always sat. But that night, no one asked me to sit down. They came in chatting, laughing. My son walked in talking about a work meeting that had run long. My daughter-in-law was busy wrangling the baby, who just learned how to throw things. They kissed my cheek in passing a light, distracted touch, and sat down. I lingered by the sink, wiping my hands on a towel that had already absorbed too much of me. I didn't say anything. I told myself I would sit in a moment. But when I finally eased myself into the old wooden chair, the one with the cushion I'd stitched myself, no one looked up. They passed plates around me. The baby threw rice on the floor, and everyone laughed. They asked each other how their days were. My son poured his wife some tea. They never once turned to me. My bowl stayed untouched. I watched steam rise and fall from the surface, soft curls disappearing into the air. I wasn't hungry anymore. I wasn't anything anymore. Someone asked if the chicken was store-bought. My daughter-in-law said, "Oh no, Mom made it." That was the only time I was mentioned. Not thanked, not asked if I was tired, not offered a helping hand when I got up to fetch more napkins because the baby had spilled. My back ached, but I smiled. I always smile. They meant no harm, I know that. It's easier to vanish slowly than to be pushed away, I think. I chose this without meaning to. Every time I said, "Don't worry about me," I carved a little more of myself out of their world. I thought I was being kind, selfless, strong. That's what mothers do. That's what I was taught. We give, we give, we give. I cleared the plates when they were done. I washed the dishes with my hands in scalding water because the warmth reminded me I was still alive. Behind me, they watched a show on TV. They laughed loudly. I dried each plate slowly, carefully. That part still mattered to me, that things were done properly, even if no one saw. When I finally sat down on the sofa's edge, the conversation had shifted again. The baby was asleep now, slumped over on her father's shoulder. My daughter-in-law scrolled on her phone. No one turned to look at me. I wanted to say something, anything. A story, a joke, maybe just, "It's good to have everyone here." But the moment felt too full, too fast, like I'd interrupt something I no longer belonged to. So I smiled and folded my hands in my lap. I thought maybe if I were ill or injured, if I collapsed right now, maybe then someone would ask, "Are you okay?" But I wasn't, not visibly. I had mastered the art of looking fine, of saying it's all right, of sitting at the table like a shadow with soft hands. And maybe they didn't mean to leave me out. Maybe they truly didn't see. But that hurt more than if they had done it on purpose, that I could be there in plain sight and still be so utterly invisible. Later that night, after they'd all gone to bed and the house had quieted into breathing walls and creaking floors, I stood by the window. I looked out into the darkness where the streetlights flickered gently on the leaves. I whispered, "I'm fine," into the glass, and the words fogged for a second before vanishing, like me. That birthday morning, the sun came in soft and golden through the kitchen curtains, the kind of light that used to mean something, back when the kids were little and birthdays were a full-day affair. They'd make cards with crooked hearts and misspelled words, and there'd always be laughter cake, maybe even a small surprise tucked under my pillow. I used to tell them not to fuss. I used to mean it. Now I realize how precious that fuss was. How rare and fleeting. I woke up early as always. Habit has a way of beating the alarm clock. I sat on the edge of my bed for a while, just listening to the silence. My joints ached, like usual, and I stretched them gently the way I do every morning, slowly, kindly, like I'm tucking myself in rather than pulling myself up. I padded into the kitchen, set the kettle on, and opened the fridge. There was milk, half a head of lettuce, a few eggs. I thought maybe I'd make myself something special. Then I stopped. Who was I trying to impress? By noon, I'd received 4 text messages, one from each of my children. None of them said much. Happy birthday, Mom. Hope you have a good one. We'll call soon. One had a confetti gif. I looked at each message longer than necessary, holding the phone in my hand like it might warm me. No one called. No one came. I told myself it was fine. They were busy. Work kids' life. I'd always taught them not to make a big deal out of things. Save your money, I'd say. I don't need anything. Maybe I said it too much. Maybe I made it too easy for them to forget how much even a little gesture could mean. I pulled out a small cake mix from the pantry. It had probably been sitting there since last winter. I mixed it up slowly, humming an old song I couldn't quite remember the words to. I poured it into a pan, slid it into the oven, and watched through the window as it rose. There was something soothing about that, watching something grow quietly in the warmth. When it was done, I took it out, let it cool, and frosted it with a spoon. No candles, no one to blow them out for. I sliced one piece, sat down at the table, and took a bite. It was too sweet, but I chewed it slowly. I told myself this was enough, that I was lucky to be alive, that people meant well even when they forgot you. Around 3 p.m., I thought maybe someone would drop by. I even put on a bit of lipstick, brushed my hair. I sat on the porch in the same old sweater I always wear when I'm hoping someone will notice the effort. The afternoon passed like a sigh. A few cars went by. A neighborhood child laughed. Someone's dog barked. No one stopped. I went inside and changed back into my house clothes, folded the sweater neatly and placed it over the back of a chair. Then I sat back down and stared at the second slice of cake I'd cut earlier just in case. I ate that too, not because I was hungry, just because it hurt less than throwing it away. By the time evening came, I told myself again, it's fine. I even chuckled, as if I'd heard a joke no one else could. I cleaned the kitchen, washed the dishes, and put the rest of the cake in the fridge. When I passed by the mirror in the hallway, I caught my reflection. Lipstick, faded eyes, a little puffy. I smiled at myself anyway. Happy birthday, I whispered. I went to bed early that night, pulled the blanket up to my chin like I used to do for them when they were small, and just before I turned off the light, my phone buzzed with one last message. Sorry, crazy day. Hope it was nice. I stared at the screen for a while, then put the phone face down on the nightstand. It's strange how silence gets heavier when you've been told you should be happy. I've always been careful not to ask for too much, but I wonder now, was I teaching them love, or was I teaching them to overlook it? Hospitals have a particular smell, a mix of antiseptic and soft cotton, and something sterile that settles under your skin like unease. I remember clutching the paper form too tightly in my hand, creasing it beyond repair. The nurse had called my name 3 times before I realized she was talking to me. I'd been staring at the floor tiles, counting the tiny cracks between them, pretending they were roads leading anywhere but here. It was just a routine checkup, or at least that's what I'd told them. My chest had been tight lately, a quiet, heavy pressure that stayed even after a good night's sleep. Not pain exactly, just weight. But I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to bother them. I hadn't wanted to scare anyone. I hadn't even told them I was going. It felt easier that way, cleaner. So I went alone, signed the forms, waited under the cold fluorescent lights while a television played muted morning news. My coat was too thin for the air conditioning, and I regretted not wearing a scarf. When they called me in, I smiled at the nurse. That's the strange thing, even when I'm scared. Even when I'm hurting, I smile. It's like my mouth doesn't know how to move any other way. They ran the tests: blood pressure, heart scan, a small monitor clipped to my finger. I watched the numbers climb and fall like they belonged to someone else. The doctor came in young and polite, asking questions in that hurried voice that means he has 6 more people to see. I answered every one of them clearly, gently. I didn't let my voice shake. He told me it was probably nothing, but they'd check further. More scans, maybe a referral. I nodded. Said, of course, thank you. He said, do you have someone to call? I shook my head. No need. I'm fine. That's the lie I've built my life around. I'm fine. I used to mean it. Now I say it so people won't ask again. On the way home, I took the long bus route just to watch the city roll by. It had rained while I was inside, and everything looked rinsed, like a photograph left too long in the sink. I looked down at the paper they gave me tucked into a blue folder, with my name spelled in block letters. I didn't open it. I didn't want to know just yet. When I got home, I placed the folder under a pile of old recipes in the kitchen drawer. Then I made tea. Always tea, it's the one thing I still do just for myself. As the kettle whistled, I imagined what it would have felt like if someone had been there waiting, someone to ask. So how was it? Not even a big question. Just that. The phone didn't ring. No one asked why I was quiet that evening or why I skipped our family video chat. I still joined, of course. I smiled, nodded, laughed at a joke I didn't quite hear. They told me about their week. I said mine was the same as always. They don't know that I was hooked up to machines just that morning. They don't know about the bruising on my arm where they drew blood. They don't know I nearly cried in the elevator when an old woman next to me said, "You look pale, dear." I whispered thank you and got out 2 floors early. Later that night, I sat in bed with the light off, holding the folder I had hidden earlier. I opened it, read the words slowly. Nothing final, nothing urgent, but something there, something that needs watching. I closed it gently and placed it back in the drawer. And I thought maybe I'll tell them next week, maybe. But then again, what would I say? Hi, I was scared. And you didn't even know. Would they apologize? Would they change? Would they come sit beside me for a while? Or would they just say, "You should have told us," and move on? I don't know what's worse, being alone in that sterile room or realizing I chose the loneliness so no one would feel burdened by me. I wrapped my own fear in silence, decorated it with smiles, and I called it strength. I wonder if they've ever stopped to ask themselves how much it cost me to be that strong. There's a sweater I used to wear all the time, pale blue soft at the sleeves, with a row of small buttons that I sewed back on more than once. It wasn't expensive, but it was mine. I wore it to grocery stores, to doctor appointments, to birthdays, even just around the house, on days when the air felt a little colder than it should have. That sweater held my shape like it remembered me when no one else did. Over time, it began to fray at the cuffs. A thread came loose near the left pocket. Then the hem curled, and slowly it started to fall apart. I kept wearing it anyway, not out of stubbornness, but out of something quieter. Familiarity, maybe. Safety. I could wrap it around my shoulders like armor and feel held. Not by someone, but by the memory of someone. A long time ago, someone told me I looked lovely in blue. I can't even remember who, but I held on to it. One evening, we had guests just family, but enough to make me wipe the shelves and light the good candle in the hall. I even baked a pie the way I used to, when we all lived under the same roof and everything felt easier. I wore the sweater because it was warm, and I felt tired, and the weather was turning. As people arrived, I smiled as always, and they brushed past me with hugs and kisses and greetings. No one looked twice at what I was wearing. We sat down to eat. I served. I refilled glasses. I laughed at their stories and kept the conversation flowing like tea from a pot always warm, never empty. And then at one point I heard my daughter-in-law ask my granddaughter, "You need a new sweater, don't you? That one's starting to look worn." The girl nodded and they moved on. I looked down at my own sleeves. A thread had come loose again and was dangling like a little whisper. No one noticed. Later that night, after they left, I sat on the couch and picked at that thread. I thought about how many years I've spent patching things: clothes, meals, plans, people. I stitched birthdays back together when someone forgot. I mended apologies without ever hearing them. I kept everything from falling apart because I believed that was my job. My love was measured in repairs. But whoever mended me? No one had noticed the sweater unraveling, and somehow that felt like a metaphor for everything I'd become. I had smiled through fatigue, offered kindness, through loneliness, folded blankets, and cooked dinner through silent heartbreak. And because I didn't cry out, they assumed I was whole. There was a time when a hole in my clothes would make someone say, "Let me fix that for you." Now it's just part of the scenery, like the worn carpet, or the old woman who lives in the guest room and doesn't ask for much. I sat there for a while with that thread wrapped around my finger. It left a faint indentation, a little red line that vanished after a few seconds. Just like me, present but not permanent, tangible but not seen. The next morning, I folded the sweater carefully and placed it at the bottom of the drawer. I thought about throwing it away, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I find something that holds me the same way. I wore a different top that day, something newer, nicer. Still no one said a word. That's the thing, isn't it? When you're quiet about your needs for long enough, the world forgets you have them. When you always smile, no one asks what's behind it. And when you've been invisible this long, even your unraveling becomes part of the background. I used to believe that if I just kept giving, someone would notice when I started to fade. But now I'm not so sure. It happened in the bathroom, a place that over the years had become my little sanctuary. Not because it was lovely or special, but because it was the only room in the house with a lock. I'd gone in to wash my hands after cleaning up the kitchen. It had been a long day. Too many dishes, too much noise, and not a single thank you spoken in my direction. The sounds of the family still filled the house. Someone laughing at the television, the baby's shriek, a door closing, music humming faintly from a phone. I stood over the sink, my palms under the warm stream of water. I watched the way it ran over my fingers, disappearing into the drain like something melting away. And then I saw my face in the mirror. Tired. That was the first word that came to mind. Not old, not sick, not even sad. Just tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. My eyes were rimmed with red. My lips were pressed into the same faint line they always made when I was holding something in, and suddenly, without warning, the corners of my eyes began to sting. Tears. I hadn't cried in months, maybe years. I'd forgotten what it felt like, the heat behind the eyes, the heaviness in the chest, that strange aching relief that came with letting go. But I didn't let go. I blinked hard, bit the inside of my cheek, ran cold water. I stood there, gripping the sink, breathing slowly through my nose, like I used to do during labor. Why didn't I cry? Because someone might knock, because someone might need something, because they'd ask, "Are you okay?" And I'd have to lie again. Or worse, they wouldn't ask. They'd see and walk away thinking, She's always like that, emotional, sensitive. She'll be fine. I've always been too polite to cry, too trained in quiet strength. I was taught early on that a woman's job is to endure, to smooth things over, to swallow pain and offer comfort. I thought that was noble once. I see now that it was a kind of erasure. I dried my hands, then my face, straightened my shoulders, opened the door and stepped out like nothing had happened. The hallway looked the same. The voices hadn't missed a beat. I could have been gone for hours or seconds. It wouldn't have mattered. I went back to folding laundry. Baby clothes, mismatched socks, someone's work shirt. I held the shirt to my chest for a moment longer than needed. It smelled faintly of cologne and sweat life moving forward. Then I folded it and placed it neatly in a basket that no one would thank me for carrying. That night I lay in bed and wondered what it would feel like to cry without shame, to sob in the middle of a sentence and not apologize for it, to be seen not just as the giver, the doer, the fixer, but as someone who needs to, wants to, breaks to. There's a part of me, a small silent corner, that still hopes someone will come in one day and say, "You don't have to be strong right now." That they'll sit beside me, hold my hand, and wait for me to speak without rushing me to finish. But hope, I've learned, is both a lantern and a weight. So instead, I let the tears come in private places, behind locked doors, between wash cycles, after everyone has eaten, while brushing my teeth. Moments too small for anyone to notice. Moments where I get to feel human just for a breath, before I tuck it all away again, and smile at the world that forgot to ask if I was okay. I wish someone had told me you don't owe anyone your silence. But it's taken me a lifetime to start whispering again. There was a time when my phone would light up with their names, sometimes twice a day, sometimes more. Little things, small things, Mom. How do I fix this recipe? Or, can you watch the baby for a couple of hours? Or, I just wanted to hear your voice. I used to answer with a smile already forming before I even picked up. I'd cradle the phone to my ear like a seashell, listening for waves of their lives. It made me feel needed. It made me feel included. But lately the phone just sits there, quiet, cold. I still keep it charged, still check the signal bars as if they matter. I keep the ringer on loud enough to wake me from another room. I tell myself they're just busy, always busy, and that they'll call soon. But days pass, sometimes a week, and then when I finally get a text, it's a group message, something logistical, a carpool arrangement, a link to a shared calendar. Never, "How are you feeling today?" I tried calling a few times. At first I'd make up little reasons, just checking if that soup recipe worked out or I found that old photo you liked. But over time, even I began to hear the sadness in my voice, the way I stretched out the words hoping they'd hold on a little longer, and they'd respond politely, hurriedly. "Sorry, Mom, can I call you back later?" Or, "Love you, but I'm in the middle of something." Sometimes I could hear the irritation just beneath the surface, and that stung worse than silence. So I stopped. I told myself it wasn't fair to put that on them, that they had their own lives now, their own stresses, their own families. I reminded myself that I'd raised them to be independent, that I should be proud. But independence and absence feel heartbreakingly similar when you're sitting by yourself waiting for a voice that never comes. One evening, the phone buzzed. I jumped a little heart-thudding, hope rising, but it was just an app notification, a reminder to drink water. I almost laughed. Even my phone was checking in on me more than my children. Sometimes I imagine scenarios where they remember. Maybe they're driving and suddenly think I haven't heard Mom's voice today. Maybe they feel a tug, a memory of my hands brushing their hair back, of my laugh, of my quiet presence at their side. Maybe they'll call, And I'll say, "Hello, sweetheart," and pretend I wasn't just reading a book I couldn't focus on or staring at the photo frame beside the kettle. But those moments remain imagined. I've learned to keep busy in ways that make the hours pass. I clean things that are already clean. I reorganize drawers. I walk the same quiet block, nodding to the same trees. I hum songs no one taught me, just tunes that arrived one day and stayed. And all the while, the phone remains untouched, like a relic, like a forgotten invitation. What hurts most isn't the silence. It's the fact that I train them to think I'm always okay, that they don't need to worry, that I'd tell them if something were wrong. But the truth is, I don't know how to say those things anymore. I've spent too long pretending I don't need to be asked. Now, even when they do call once in a rare while, the conversations are quick, surface level. They don't notice the pause before I answer. They don't hear the way I linger after goodbye, holding the phone to my ear just a moment longer, as if I could absorb their voices and make them last. I'm not angry, just emptied. A phone that never rings becomes more than silence. It becomes a mirror. And some days when I look into it, I wonder if I'm still here, or if I've become just another notification waiting to be ignored. There's something about the way steam curls up from a teacup when the room is quiet that makes the stillness feel louder. I used to set 2 cups out by instinct. One for me, one for whoever might stop by, a neighbor, a grandchild, even one of the kids dropping in unannounced. I liked the anticipation of it, the small gesture of readiness, the thought that someone might come sit across from me, wrap their hands around the warm porcelain, and ask how I was doing, really. But now I only set 1. The second cup started to feel like a joke I was telling myself. It went unused too many times. I'd pour water, watch it go cold. I'd cover the cup with a saucer, hoping to keep it warm a little longer just in case someone rang the bell. No one did. Eventually, I stopped setting it out. Now it's tea for 1, always. I still use the good teapot, still add a pinch of dried jasmine leaves when I want to feel fancy. I steep it carefully, not because anyone is watching, but because the ritual makes me feel like I still matter, like details still count. I take my time, let the aroma rise, listen to the kettle whistle like it's singing just for me. The house stays quiet, no footsteps overhead, no second voice chiming in with a story, just the creak of wood under my feet and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I sit down at the table, pull the chair in slowly so it doesn't scrape. I hold the cup with both hands, letting the heat soak into my fingers, into my bones. Sometimes I imagine someone sitting across from me, not saying much, just being there. That used to be enough. Presence, company without obligation. I remember my own mother sitting like this, alone, dignified, quiet. I never understood the weight of that silence until now. I wonder if she felt like I do. The odd thing is, I never resented the solitude. Not at first. It had its softness. I could think clearly, breathe slower, listen to birds outside the window without distraction. But over time, solitude hardened. It went from peaceful to sharp, from welcome to unnoticed. No one thinks to ask if I'm lonely, and I don't volunteer it. If I did, they'd say, "Oh, Mom, why didn't you say something?" But how do you explain the ache of making tea for someone who no longer comes? How do you describe the echo of a second cup that never gets filled? I keep the extra cups in the cupboard, of course. I dust them now and then. But each time I touch one, I feel something in me hesitate. That pause. It's the space where hope used to be. The belief that someone might show up, sit down and say, "Pour me some too." One day last week, I went to the store and bought a small tin of new tea, something with rose petals in it. I thought maybe I'd save it for when someone visits. But when I got home, I realized I was doing it again, planning for a presence that isn't promised. Still, I put the tin on the shelf. just in case. I know I'm not forgotten. Not really. They think of me in moments when they pass by a bakery I used to like, or when they hear a song I used to hum. They remember me in flickers, but flickers don't sit at the table. Flickers don't ask, "Can I have some tea too?" So I drink alone, 1 cup, slowly. And when I finish, I rinse the cup, dry it with a soft towel, and place it gently back on the hook, a small act of care for a small life. It's funny how something as simple as tea can reveal so much, not just about who is there, but about who isn't, and how over time you learn to sit across from your own shadow and make peace with its silence. It started with little things, a quick errand, a favor on a Tuesday. "Mom, could you pick up the dry cleaning? Could you watch the baby for an hour? Could you come by and stir the soup while I run out?" And I said yes, every time, because that's what mothers do, because I thought love meant always being there when they asked, because I believed, perhaps foolishly, that if I kept showing up, they'd see me, not just as a helper, not just as a standby, but as a person with a heart and hands and needs of her own. But eventually, helping stopped feeling like love. It started feeling like duty, and then like obligation. And still, I said yes. No one asked if I was tired. No one said, "You've already done enough." The favors piled on like soft snow, layer by layer, until I could barely see my own time beneath it. The worst part wasn't that they asked. It was that they didn't even seem to notice they were asking. It became automatic, assumed. I was the one who kept everything humming in the background. I was the cushion, the gap filler, the backup plan. And I kept smiling. I'd show up to their homes with groceries, a home-cooked meal, a bag of extra diapers I noticed they were low on. I'd fold laundry while they were out, sweep the floor without being asked, and when they returned they'd say, "Oh, you didn't have to," but not like they meant it, more like it was a formality. Then they'd move on. One time I came over just to visit. I didn't bring anything. No food, no offer of help, no supplies. I sat on the couch with my hands folded, waiting for someone to talk to me, really talk. But after 10 minutes of polite chatter, someone asked if I could just stir the sauce for a second. And then someone else asked if I could help change a diaper. And just like that, I slipped back into service. I wasn't angry. I was something quieter, disappointed maybe, worn. That night I drove home with my fingers wrapped tightly around the steering wheel, knuckles pale. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just felt erased, like my purpose had been trimmed down to usefulness, like a tool in a drawer. The hardest thing to admit is this: I helped because I wanted to be close. And somewhere along the way, helping became the only way I was allowed to belong. Not as a friend, not as a woman with a life and a mind and a voice, but as an extension of their comfort. I started testing it. Small things. I let the phone ring instead of answering right away. I said I was busy even when I wasn't. I turned down a favor, just one. "I can't today, I'm resting." And the response, "Oh, are you okay?" But it wasn't concern. It was confusion, like I'd forgotten my role. It struck me then I had trained them to expect me to always say yes. I had built the illusion of my strength with such care that they stopped believing I ever needed help. I had buried my own exhaustion under layers of competence. And now they didn't know how to see me any other way. Even kindness became a transaction. Even love started to feel like a performance, one I couldn't stop for fear of disappearing completely. Because what happens when you stop being useful? What happens when you say, "No, I need something too"? The answer came quietly in the echo of silence. After I said no, nothing. No one came. No one followed up. No one asked what I needed. The space I once filled with all my effort simply closed behind me, closed. I don't regret loving them, but I regret not loving myself enough to set boundaries sooner, to say I'm not a service, I'm a soul, to remind them that I exist beyond the help I give. Now I help less, and I hurt more, but at least the hurt is honest. It was a Tuesday or maybe a Thursday. They all blur together now, these soft, quiet days. I was sweeping the back porch, brushing away the dry leaves that curled like forgotten thoughts, when I heard the familiar ping of a voice message from the family group chat. Just a short clip, my daughter talking about the weekend plans, asking if anyone could pick up cupcakes on the way to the park. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji, and then for no reason I could really explain, I typed, "I'm fine, by the way. Thanks for asking." Then I stared at the screen, the blinking cursor, the sheer absurdity of what I'd just written. And I erased it. Instead, I sent "Sounds good. Let me know what time." No one replied. Later that night, I lay in bed with my phone beside me. I scrolled through our messages, dozens and dozens of little exchanges, schedules, errands, reminders, logistics, and almost none of them asked how I was. Not really, not truly. The last time someone typed, "How are you?" It was 3 weeks ago, and even then it was tucked between 2 questions about laundry detergent and who was bringing the folding chairs. I went back further, a month, 2 months, and all I could see was myself answering cheerfully, always punctuated with emojis and exclamation marks. "I'm fine. No worries. Of course." As if enthusiasm could substitute for being seen. But the truth was, I wasn't fine. I was exhausted. I was lonely. I was aching in places I didn't have names for anymore. And more than anything, I was angry not at them, but at myself, for saying those 2 words so many times that they had lost all meaning, for building a fortress of okayness that no one ever tried to climb. I remember once years ago watching one of the kids fall and scrape their knee. They said through tears, "I'm fine," but I saw the blood. I saw the shaking hands. I scooped them up anyway, kissed the bruise, whispered, "You don't have to be fine. You just have to be here." So when did I stop being allowed the same grace? It's a strange kind of grief, the realization that your silence has made you invisible, that you've spent years managing everyone else's pain only to find that no one knows what yours sounds like. You teach them not to ask. You reward them for not noticing. And then when the silence becomes unbearable, you look around and find that no one is listening, not because they don't care, but because you convinced them they didn't need to. One afternoon, I was folding laundry when my son called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. He asked if I could come by and help with something I don't even remember what. And I said softly, "I'm a little tired today." There was a pause, a long one. Then he said, "Oh, okay, maybe next time." He didn't ask why I was tired. He didn't say, "Are you all right, Mom?" He just moved on. I sat there with a damp towel in my hands and realized the silence after "I'm fine" had become normal, expected. Even when I didn't say it aloud anymore, it was heard in everything I did. I wish I had screamed instead, or cried, or even just whispered, "I'm not okay." But now, I'm not sure they'd hear me if I did. I trained them too well. Now when I walk into a room, no one looks up. When I clear my throat to speak, no one pauses. And when I say I'm fine, they nod, distracted, as if it's just another piece of background noise, another line in a play they've heard too many times to care about. And maybe that's the most heartbreaking thing of all, not the loneliness, not the silence, but the knowledge that I helped build it one polite dismissal at a time. I thought I was protecting them, I thought I was being strong, but all I did was teach them how to live without seeing me. It had rained that morning, a soft, steady drizzle that darkened the pavement and painted everything in a sleepy gray. I looked out the window for a long time before finally grabbing my coat. I had made a list not because I was forgetful, but because writing things down made the trip feel like a task worth doing. Eggs, milk, a bit of ginger for my tea, bananas if they looked ripe. I wrote it all carefully in my small curved handwriting on the corner of an envelope. At the store, I moved slowly, one aisle at a time. My knees had been especially cruel that week. Every step was a conversation with pain, every bend a negotiation. But I didn't limp. I didn't wince. I held myself upright, shoulders back, the way I was taught. Never show what you carry. Never make others uncomfortable. I nodded to the cashier as I checked out, polite as ever. She didn't meet my eyes. She was young and tired, and didn't need to see mine. That was fine. I packed my own bags, not too heavy, not too full, just manageable enough to lift without crying out. When I got home, I stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long moment. It was only 2 flights, but to me it felt like a mountain. I shifted the bags to one arm, reached for the railing, and began to climb. Halfway up, the weight pulled against my back, and I felt something seize in my hip, a sharp jolt that made me gasp, not loud enough to be heard, just loud enough for my own ears. But I didn't stop. I pressed forward, dragging one foot behind the other, like I was chasing something invisible. Dignity, maybe, or pride. At the top, I paused again. My breath came in short, uneven waves. I leaned against the wall and let my forehead rest on the cool plaster. My hand shook slightly as I unlocked the door, and when I walked in, the silence inside the apartment felt like a punch. No one was there to say, "Let me help you." No one to see the pain behind my careful posture, the trembling underneath my steady hands. I set the bags down one by one onto the counter. My fingers ached from the handles. I looked down and saw a faint red groove across my palms, the shape of carrying too much for too long. I thought just for a moment of calling one of the kids, just to say hello. Maybe to mention the stairs. Maybe to say it's getting harder. But I already knew how the call would go. Polite concern, promises to visit soon, then the inevitable pivot. Anyway, I was going to ask, "Do you know where I put that thing?" So instead, I made tea. Always tea. And as I waited for the kettle to boil, I pressed my hand gently against my hip, feeling the pain ripple like an echo. I leaned on the counter, letting the weight shift from one leg to the other. I looked out the window. The rain had stopped, but everything still glistened wet, washed, fragile. A few minutes later, I saw one of my neighbors come home. Her daughter leapt out of the car to help carry bags up the steps. They laughed together, struggling playfully with an umbrella. I smiled at the scene, soft, familiar, warm. Then I turned away. I put the groceries away slowly, methodically, folding each bag as if it mattered, as if tidiness could soften the ache. I sat down in the chair by the window with my tea and stared at the stairs outside. They looked harmless now, simple concrete steps, but I knew the truth. I knew the cost. That evening, I sent a photo to the family group chat, a picture of the soup I'd made with the groceries. Rainy day food, I wrote with a smiling emoji. They replied with hearts and yum and save me some next time. No one asked how I was. No one asked how I got those groceries. No one saw the pain behind the picture. But that's what I've taught them, isn't it? To look at the surface, to trust the smile. Sometimes I think about taking a photo of my hands after carrying those bags, the red marks, the swelling, the quiet testimony of burden. But I never do, because I've always believed that love is invisible, that the best kind is the kind that goes unseen, unmentioned. But now I wonder, if no one sees it, Does it still count? They called that morning not with excitement or affection, but with a question. Are you home? I said yes, before they even explained. That's the habit now. I always say yes, because maybe, just maybe saying yes means they'll come, even if it's not for me. They arrived an hour later. No hugs, no lingering glances, just a distracted hey as they stepped over the threshold. One of them was already talking about needing to borrow the stepladder. The other was on their phone. They didn't look at my face, not really, and certainly not long enough to notice the way my eyes had lit up when I heard the car pull into the driveway. I had made tea. I always do, even when I know it won't be touched, even when I know it's just for show, now a performance of what hospitality used to mean. I placed the cups on the table anyway, arranged the sugar bowl just right, sat there for a moment waiting for them to settle in. But they didn't. They went straight to the garage, talking loudly, rummaging through things I'd tried to keep organized. I heard laughter tools, clanging doors, opening and shutting. I stood in the kitchen, hands folded in front of me, not knowing whether to go in and offer help or just stay out of the way. I chose silence. I usually do. Eventually, one of them popped their head in, breathless, distracted. Do you have any extra light bulbs? I nodded and pointed toward the cupboard. No, thank you. No smile. Just the swift turning away again. I wanted to ask about their week, about their work, about the baby's first steps. But I could see it on their faces, the impatience, the subtle bracing for small talk they didn't want to have. So I swallowed my questions and instead asked, how long do you think you'll stay? The answer, not long. Just need to grab a few things. Not long. That phrase echoed, not long. I watched as they loaded the car with tools and boxes and an old folding chair, the kind I used to sit on during soccer games and school recitals. They barely looked at me. I wondered for a flicker of a second if I'd done something wrong, if I had said something years ago that had placed this distance between us. But no, I knew better. The distance wasn't punishment. It was habit, learned indifference. Before they left, I tried again. I stepped outside, wiping my hands on my apron, not because they were dirty, but because it gave me something to do. I made some soup, I offered. Would you like to stay for a bite? One glanced at their watch. The other checked their phone. Next time, Mom. We're in a bit of a rush. Rush. As if my presence was an obstacle to be managed. As if I'd become a traffic cone in the middle of their day. I nodded, smiling. Always smiling. Of course, I said. Drive safe. They drove off, waving absently through the window. I stood there for a few seconds longer, watching the dust settle where their car had been. Then I turned back to the house, walked to the table, and poured both cups of tea down the sink. The steam had long since faded, just like the hope. Later, I opened the fridge and saw the soup carefully cooled and stored in matching containers. I didn't feel like eating anymore, but I forced down a few spoonfuls anyway, because that's what I do feed people, even when I'm starving for something else. I know they love me. I believe they do. But love, when left unspoken long enough, starts to resemble convenience, starts to feel like something they remember only when they need something. And in between those moments, I'm just a place they pass through, a pit stop, a supply closet. That visit wasn't about me. It hasn't been for a long time, and I don't know what's worse, that they no longer come to see me or that I've started expecting it. Because expecting nothing feels safer than hoping for something. They said they'd come by this weekend, said it with a smile, with warmth, with the kind of easy certainty that makes a heart stir. We'll bring the kids, they said. Maybe grab lunch. It's been too long. I nodded already, imagining the laughter, the little feet running through the hallway, the noise I used to complain about, but now ache for like an old song. I cleaned the house that Friday. Not deeply, just the kind of tidy that says, I'm still someone worth visiting. I took out the nice dishes, wiped the fingerprints from the framed pictures in the hall, took the sweater I hadn't worn in weeks, and laid it gently across the back of the chair by the window in case someone noticed. Saturday morning, I woke with a purpose. That doesn't happen as often these days. Purpose is a rare guest. I showered, washed my hair, dried it the way I used to, when I still cared if it had volume. I ironed a blouse, pale cream, with little blue flowers, and pulled on my nicest slacks, the ones I usually save for holidays or the occasional church visit. I made the soup they loved as children, the one with the slow-cooked broth and hand-torn herbs. I set the table for 5 even though I knew it might only be 3, or 2, or if I was being honest with myself, none. By noon I kept glancing at the clock. By 1 I began to sip from a mug I hadn't planned to use. I had made tea in the big pot expecting company. By 2 I turned the stove to its lowest setting just to keep things warm. By 3 I knew, but I didn't admit it yet. It wasn't until 4:30 that a text came. Sorry, Mom, something came up. Can we do next weekend? No apology for the time, no mention of the effort, just a gentle nudge pushing me into another waiting room of silence. I replied, Of course, don't worry. Next weekend is fine. I even added a heart. I don't know why. I ate alone, just a small bowl. The broth had gone cloudy from sitting too long. I didn't taste much of it. My appetite always shrinks around disappointment, but I forced a few spoonfuls down habit maybe, or penance, for hoping too much. The rest of the soup I ladled into containers, placed them neatly in the fridge. I labeled them as if someone might still want to take one home. I even wrote little notes on the lids. Ridiculous now that I think about it. But in that moment, it made sense to give love a place to land, even if no one would see it. As the sky dimmed, I stood by the window. I had done everything right, smiled, agreed, waited patiently, and still they forgot, or remembered too late, or simply chose something else. That's the thing with promises. It's not just the promise itself. It's what it awakens in you, what it lifts from the deep. That small, stubborn hope, the soft rearrangement of a day around someone else's words, the quiet celebration of mattering. And when that promise breaks, even gently, it doesn't just vanish. It echoes, it settles, it weaves itself into the fabric of you. Another layer, another thread in the story of how you slowly become someone no one checks on anymore. I smiled through it, just like I always do. I texted back. I said I understood. I cleaned the dishes. I folded my blouse and placed it back in the drawer. Then I took off my earrings, tiny pearls I hadn't worn in years, and placed them gently in their velvet box, closed the lid slowly, as if it mattered. I didn't cry. I didn't sigh. I just sat down with my hands in my lap and stared at the empty teacup. Because at some point you stop expecting the knock at the door. You just keep the soup warm a little longer and tell yourself it's fine. It was early morning, that quiet pocket of time when the light is soft and the world hasn't fully woken yet. I was brushing my hair in the bathroom, same as I've done every day for decades, when my gaze happened to catch the mirror, a little too long. And just like that, I saw her. Not just my reflection, not the habitual glance, but her, me, the woman I used to be, and the one I've quietly become. The hair thinner, now silver, threaded through where black used to be. The eyes still brown but dulled by years of blinking away tears. The mouth soft-lined, too used to holding back words. And the shoulders slope not just from age, but from carrying everything no one else wanted to hold. I stared for a long time, not with judgment, just recognition. That mirror had witnessed so much. The nights I wept silently, wiping tears away, before stepping out into rooms that needed me to smile. The mornings I rushed to be everything for everyone, before I remembered to be anything for myself. The times I practiced saying I'm fine until I could deliver it without cracking. I looked into my own eyes and saw a woman I had neglected more than anyone else ever could. The strange part, she still looked kind. Worn down, yes. Weathered by years of silence, of service, of sacrifice. But there was still something gentle in her expression, as if she was waiting for me to ask how she was doing. And so for the first time I did. I said it aloud quietly, shakily. How are you really? The words caught in my throat unexpected in their tenderness. A single tear slipped down my cheek. Not from sadness, not from self-pity, but from relief that someone had finally asked, even if it was just me. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub and let the silence stretch. I thought of all the days I moved through like a ghost, smiling in hallways, nodding at requests, folding laundry with an aching back and a hollow heart. I thought of the dinners I ate alone, the calls I waited for, the way I began to shrink inside my own home, my own skin. How had I let this happen? No one had locked me away. No one had silenced me with cruelty. I had done it to myself with every, don't worry about me, with every cheerful, I'm fine, with every instinct to make room for others and none for myself. And yet the woman in the mirror was still here, still standing, still showing up. There was something beautiful in that. I reached up and touched my face. The skin was soft, even with the wrinkles. These were not marks of aging, they were records. Of laughter I'd given freely, of worry I'd carried alone, of nights I sat up holding a sick child, of years I spent putting everyone else first. I whispered again, "How are you?" This time the answer came, "I'm tired, but I'm still here." It wasn't dramatic. There were no violins, no breakdowns, no declarations of change. Just a soft understanding that I had to stop waiting for someone else to see me. That if I wanted to matter, I had to matter to myself first. So I stood up, took the brush again, and ran it through my hair with a little more care than usual. I chose a different blouse that morning, not because anyone would notice, but because I would. I made tea in the cup with the small chip on the rim, my favorite, the one no one else ever picks. I sipped it slowly and watched the sun touch the curtain edges. And before I turned away from the mirror, I said one last thing. I see you. Because maybe that's how it begins, not with them seeing me, but with me seeing myself clearly and without apology. It wasn't dramatic. There was no announcement, no speech or tears. One day, the words just didn't come. They asked one of them, "Everything okay, Mom?" Half-distracted eyes on their phone, and for the first time in years, I didn't answer with the usual. I just smiled, closed my eyes for a moment and let the silence stand. I watched their face falter just slightly, as if some part of them realized something was missing. The script was broken. The automatic reassurance they'd come to expect wasn't there. They didn't ask again. And so I didn't explain. That night I lay in bed and listened to the ticking of the small clock on my nightstand, that soft, steady beat that had kept me company through years of nursing babies, waiting for teenagers to come home, worrying through sleepless nights beside a snoring husband. It ticked the same now, though the house had grown so much quieter. I whispered to the ceiling, "I'm not fine," just to hear it out loud, just to know my voice still knew how to say something honest. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad. I just felt still. I had said I'm fine so many times it had become part of my body, tucked into my lungs, wrapped around my spine, stitched into the corners of my mouth. It was reflex, protection. a gentle way of making sure no one ever felt guilty, no one ever had to stop and turn their heads. But what did it cost me? I think of the conversations that could have been different, the moments where I might have said, "Actually, I'm tired. I feel forgotten. I don't know who I am anymore." I wonder what would have happened if I'd let the truth come out even once. Would they have listened? Or would they have grown uncomfortable, changed? The subject rushed to fix me, so they wouldn't have to feel their part in the story. Sometimes I think they don't want to know how I really feel. Not because they don't love me, but because it would make them see themselves too clearly. And that's a kind of mirror many people avoid. But I'm done protecting others from my truth. Now when I'm tired, I say it. I'm tired. When I'm lonely, I admit it, at least to myself. I've started writing things down, small entries in a worn notebook. Today was quiet. I missed being needed. Or I made soup and thought of how I always used to make extra. No one came. I don't know if it makes a difference. No one started asking more. The phone hasn't rung more often. The visits haven't come without requests attached. But something has shifted inside me. A weight loosened. A small breath of something that feels like dignity. There's a kind of strength in not saying I'm fine, in letting silence speak for itself, in not performing ease or resilience, just being tired, soft, a little broken maybe, but still here. One afternoon I sat on the porch while a breeze moved through the trees and a neighbor walked by. She waved and asked, "How are you today?" And I said, "It's been a hard week." She stopped, walked up the steps, sat beside me. She didn't say anything grand, just, "Do you want to talk about it?" And I did. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. We sat together in the golden hour, and for once I didn't feel like I had to hold up the sky alone. It turns out when you stop saying I'm fine, the world doesn't fall apart. The people who truly see you lean in closer. And those who don't, they were never really listening anyway. I sit by the window more often now, not out of boredom, not even out of hope, but because the light that comes in during the late afternoon feels like company. The way it warms the edge of the table, slides across the floor, brushes against my wrist as I lift my teacup. It makes me feel like I'm still part of something alive, something that moves and shifts and changes. And sometimes in that quiet light, I ask myself a question no one else thinks to ask me anymore. How are you? Not in that passing, obligatory way, not like a button pressed on a machine, but slowly, tenderly, like I mean it. I don't always answer out loud, but the answer always comes. Sometimes I say I'm tired but peaceful, or lonely today but steady. Other times, it's just still here, still breathing. And now and then, more often lately, it's actually, I'm okay. Because something has shifted. Not in them, not in the ones who forgot to call, or stopped coming by, or assumed I'd always be there no matter what. They haven't changed. But I have. I stopped asking for proof that I matter. I stopped waiting for someone to pull a chair beside me and say, "Tell me everything." I realized that the one person I most needed to sit beside me was already here. Me. This version of myself, quieter, slower, softer, is no longer someone I pity. She's someone I respect. She's carried so much with grace. She's held the hands of children and memories and grief. She's filled empty rooms with warmth and empty cups with tea. She's whispered herself through heartbreak, stitched herself back together with silence and steadiness. Now when I walk past the mirror, I look. I make eye contact, and sometimes I smile. Not for show, just for her. For the woman who stopped pretending she wasn't breaking. For the one who still gets up each day and finds something beautiful in it, even if no one else sees. I ask myself how I am because I deserve to be asked, because I am still becoming, still learning how to listen to myself the way I once listened to everyone else. And no, it doesn't fill the room with laughter. It doesn't replace the sound of their voices or bring back the buzz of being needed, but it fills something else, something deeper, a quiet place inside me that used to echo with neglect now hums with something softer, awareness, care, even love. Self-love isn't loud. It doesn't storm in with declarations or promises. It arrives like steam curling from a single teacup, like the sigh you didn't realize you were holding, like the wordless moment when you finally exhale and feel the weight shift. Today I asked myself how I am, and I said I'm healing. Not healed, not whole, but healing. And for now, that's enough. Now the house is still. The kettle has gone quiet. The clock ticks like a heartbeat in another room. And here I am wrapped in the last light of the day, breathing slower than I used to, but deeper too. I no longer rush to fill silences. I let them stretch out like soft blankets. I let them hold me. I used to believe that being strong meant staying silent, that if I didn't speak my pain, it wouldn't burden anyone. But silence, it turns out, isn't absence. It's a presence too heavy to ignore once you stop running from it. I lived for so long behind, I'm fine that I nearly forgot what truth sounded like. But now I speak to myself gently. I check in the way I used to do with everyone else. I give myself the care I once gave away, without asking if I could keep a little. And I have found in the hush between what I lost and what I've claimed a kind of peace. Not because they came back, not because they apologized or saw me again, but because I saw myself, finally, fully, without shame. I don't need to be loud. I don't need to beg. I don't need to wear my strength like a costume. I just need to be real, to sit with my own heart, hold its weary hands, and whisper, I see you. They forgot me, but I remember. I remember the love I gave, the grace I carried, the quiet way I stayed kind. And now in the space where no one asks how I am, I answer anyway. And that at last is enough.